In a laboratory in Beijing, researchers found that a particle of iron oxide, something most people would call rust, behaves like a living enzyme. Drop it into a film of bacteria, add a trace of peroxide, and it starts chemically dissolving the glue that holds dental plaque onto a tooth. No bristles. No scrubbing, no mechanical force at all. And if that sounds like a small laboratory curiosity, consider this. The object you use every morning to fight that exact same film of bacteria, the toothbrush sitting in your bathroom right now, was invented in China in the year 1498. It has been the same fundamental design for more than 5 centuries. Stiff fibers on a stick, dragged across enamel by a human hand. Here's how the new approach actually works, why it took this long to arrive, and why the engineering is much harder than a headline makes it sound. Take a second and think about how strange that is. The bristle toothbrush, according to the Library of Congress, was not invented until 1498 in China, where stiff, coarse hairs were taken from the back of a hog's neck and attached to handles made of bone or bamboo. Boar bristles stayed in use until 1938, when nylon bristles were introduced by DuPont, and the first nylon version was sold as Dr. West's Miracle Toothbrush. That is the entire history of innovation in the object. We swapped pig hair for plastic. Everything else, the head, the handle, the motion, the assumption that a human being must physically scrub each surface of each tooth twice a day, has survived essentially unchanged since the Ming Dynasty. We have split the atom in that time. We sequenced the human genome. We put a rover on Mars and built machines that can hold a conversation. And the primary defense for the most common chronic disease on Earth is still a stick with fibers glued to one end. That last part is not an exaggeration. According to the World Health Organization's Global Oral Health Status Report, oral diseases affect close to 3.5 billion people worldwide, roughly half the human population. Untreated tooth decay in permanent teeth is described in the World Health Organization's own materials as the single most common health condition on the planet, affecting an estimated 2.5 billion people. Global cases of oral disease have risen by around 1 billion over the past 3 decades. Whatever else the toothbrush is, it is a tool with a very high failure rate, and almost nobody stops to ask why. To understand why researchers started looking for a completely different approach, you have to understand what the brush is actually fighting. Because it is not food, and it is not really dirt. It is a structure. Dental plaque is a biofilm. That word matters. A biofilm is not a loose smear of bacteria sitting on a surface. It is an organized community of microorganisms that build themselves a physical scaffold, a sticky matrix of sugar-based polymers that the bacteria secrete and then live inside. Research on caries-causing biofilms describes this matrix as a protective structure that shields the bacteria within it, making them notoriously difficult to remove or treat. The bacteria inside it also generate highly acidic pockets right at the tooth surface, and that acid is what dissolves the mineral in your enamel and starts a cavity. So the biofilm is doing 2 things at once. It is gluing itself to your tooth, and it is manufacturing acid in the tiny protected spaces underneath. And it is a far more capable opponent than most people assume. Because the bacteria are enmeshed inside that polymer scaffold, they are physically shielded from things that would normally kill them. Research in this area repeatedly notes that biofilm-dwelling bacteria resist antimicrobial treatment in ways that the same bacteria, floating freely, would not. The matrix acts as a barrier that slows or blocks the penetration of whatever you rinse your mouth with. This is not unique to teeth. The same problem shows up on medical implants, in catheters, in water pipes, and in industrial plumbing, and it is one of the reasons biofilms are treated as a serious engineering challenge well outside dentistry. Now look at what a toothbrush does about that. A toothbrush is a purely mechanical instrument. It works by abrasion. You drag fibers across a surface, and friction physically tears the biofilm off. It is the same principle as scrubbing a pan. The technology has been refined at the margins with softer filaments, angled tufts, oscillating heads, pressure sensors, timers, and sonic vibration. But every single one of those improvements is still an answer to the same question: how do we scrub better? And scrubbing has a hard ceiling for 3 reasons that are built into the physics. The first is reach. The bristle can only clean where the bristle can go. The surfaces between your teeth, the deep grooves on the chewing surface of a molar, and the pocket where the gum meets the tooth are the exact places plaque prefers to live, and they are the exact places a fiber struggles to enter. There is published dental research comparing cleaning between the teeth using a sonic toothbrush against a water-based irrigation system, and in that comparison, the interdental result favored the irrigator, with electron microscope images of the brushed samples still showing substantial amounts of biofilm. That is a narrow study, not a verdict on brushing, but it illustrates the structural problem. The brush is not failing because it is badly made. It is failing because of geometry. The second is technique. A toothbrush outsources the hardest part of the job to a half-asleep human being at 6 in the morning. Angle, pressure, duration, coverage, all of it depends on the person holding it. And for a large number of people, including children, older adults, and anyone with limited hand mobility, consistently good technique is not realistically achievable at all. The third is the deepest one. Even a perfect scrub only removes what it touches. It does nothing to the chemistry. The moment the brush is put down, the surviving bacteria begin rebuilding the matrix, and the whole structure regenerates within hours. Brushing is not a cure. It is a demolition schedule. So a group of researchers asked a different question. Instead of trying to build a better scrubber, what if you attacked the matrix itself? What if you could get the plaque to fall apart chemically from the inside, in the places a bristle can never physically reach? The answer to that question starts with a discovery made in Beijing that had nothing to do with teeth. In 2007, a team at the Institute of Biophysics of the Chinese Academy of Sciences, led by Professor Yan Xiyun with Lizong Gao as first author, published a paper in Nature Nanotechnology reporting something that contradicted textbook assumptions. Magnetic iron oxide nanoparticles, which everyone had treated as chemically inert, turned out to have intrinsic enzyme-like catalytic activity. Specifically, they behaved like peroxidase, a natural enzyme. Yan's group later gave this class of material a name that stuck: nanozymes. According to the Institute of Biophysics, that discovery overturned the general view that nanoparticles are chemically inert and opened up applications across medicine, agriculture, food production, and environmental science. Here is the plain version of what a nanozyme does. A natural enzyme is a protein that speeds up a specific chemical reaction. It is extraordinarily good at its job and extraordinarily fragile. It degrades with heat, with time, with the wrong acidity. A nanozyme is a piece of inorganic material, in this case iron oxide, that performs the same catalytic trick without being alive, without being a protein, and without being fragile. It is cheap, it is stable, and it keeps working. There is a useful way to picture the difference. A natural enzyme is like a precision hand tool made of something soft. It does one job beautifully, and it wears out. A nanozyme is closer to a small piece of stone that happens to be shaped correctly to do the same job. It is cruder, it is not alive, and it does not wear out in the same way. You can make it in bulk, store it on a shelf, and put it somewhere hostile without it falling apart. That combination, catalytic behavior plus physical durability, is why the field expanded so quickly after that first paper. Now put that inside a mouth. The particular reaction these iron oxide nanozymes catalyze takes hydrogen peroxide and converts it into free radicals, highly reactive fragments of molecules. On its own, hydrogen peroxide at low concentration does relatively little to an established biofilm. But when it meets the catalyst, it is converted into something far more aggressive, right at that spot. And here is the detail that turns this from chemistry into strategy. The catalytic activity of these iron oxide particles is strongest in acidic conditions. Published work in this field describes iron oxide nanoparticles with peroxidase-like activity being designed to disrupt oral biofilm under weak acid conditions around pH 4.5, which the researchers describe as the optimal pH for the catalytic system. Think about what that means. The most acidic place in your entire mouth is the inside of a plaque biofilm, in the exact pocket where the bacteria are producing the acid that damages your enamel. So the catalyst is at its most powerful precisely where the disease is worst and comparatively quiet everywhere else. The chemistry is self-targeting. A 2016 study published in the journal Biomaterials with Lizong Gao as lead author tested this directly against Streptococcus mutans, the bacterium most associated with tooth decay. The reported approach used catalytic nanoparticles containing iron oxide to trigger degradation of the biofilm's extracellular matrix while killing the bacteria embedded inside it. The paper describes a greater than 5-log reduction in cell viability, which in plain terms means the surviving population was reduced by a factor of more than 100,000. The study also reported that the treatment reduced demineralization of apatite, the mineral in enamel, under acidic conditions, and that 1-minute daily topical applications suppressed the onset and severity of decay in a living model while sparing normal tissue. 1 minute, topical, no bristles. That is the first pillar. Dissolve the scaffold instead of scraping it. But a chemical alone does not answer the reach problem completely because the fluid still has to get into the tight spaces and the debris still has to come out. Which brings us to the second pillar, and this is where it starts to look genuinely alien. Researchers have been building microscopic machines that swim. At the Chinese University of Hong Kong, a team led by Professor Zhang Li in the Department of Mechanical and Automation Engineering has worked for years on magnetically controlled micro-robots for exactly this problem. In one published study, the group built a swarm out of porous iron oxide microparticles, actuated by a simple rotating magnetic field. The swarm attacks a biofilm through two mechanisms at once. It generates bactericidal free radicals that kill the bacteria and degrade the matrix, and it physically disrupts the biofilm while driving those radicals deeper inside. Read that again. It is the nanozyme chemistry and the mechanical scrubbing combined into one system, except the scrubbing is being done by particles small enough to enter spaces no bristle could ever reach, and they are being steered from outside the body by a magnetic field, rather than by a human wrist. The group has continued pushing. In work published in Science Advances, described by the university as the first anti-biofilm liquid-bodied magnetically controlled robot, the team developed a magnetic hydrogel whose viscoelasticity can be switched by modulating the external magnetic field. In the university's description, the robot can shift between behavioral modes, rotating and rolling over obstacles in one mode and adapting its shape to the surface in another. In earlier reported testing inside tubes designed to mimic difficult physical environments in the body, the machines cleared biofilms within 5 minutes, destroying over 99% of the bacteria. There is a third mechanism worth adding because it explains how you get the force without the friction. A 2024 paper in the journal Nanomaterials from researchers at Zhejiang University of Posts and Telecommunications working with Nanjing First Hospital described iron oxide microbubbles that respond to both magnetic fields and ultrasound. A magnetic field steers the bubbles to the biofilm. Then ultrasound is applied, and the bubbles collapse through what is called inertial cavitation. Each collapse releases a tiny burst of mechanical force, and that force tears open the biofilm structure while releasing the iron oxide particles deeper inside, where they catalyze the peroxide reaction and kill the bacteria within. That is the whole idea in one image. Instead of one large brush pushed by a hand, millions of microscopic events, each one tiny, all happening simultaneously across every surface, including the ones a bristle has never touched in your life. And there is a fourth piece, which addresses the part everyone actually cares about, the damage already done. In 2019, a team at Zhejiang University in Hangzhou, led by Professor Tang Rukang, published work in Science Advances on repairing tooth enamel. Their material, built from calcium phosphate ion clusters, forms a precursor layer on the tooth that induces the enamel's own crystal structure to grow outward from itself, mimicking the way enamel forms naturally. The reported result was a repaired layer that reproduced the complex ordered structure of natural enamel within 48 hours. Enamel is the hardest tissue in the human body, and unlike bone, it contains no living cells, which is why it has never been able to heal itself. This is an attempt to give it away. So the picture that emerges from these separate Chinese research efforts is not a better toothbrush. It is a decomposition of the toothbrush into 4 separate functions, each handled by a different mechanism. Chemistry dissolves the matrix. Micro-machines reach the geometry. Cavitation supplies the force. Mineralization repairs the surface. None of those 4 require a human being to scrub anything. Quick question before we go further. If something like this ever reached a bathroom shelf, a rinse, or a mouthpiece that did the work chemically instead of mechanically, would you actually trust it enough to change a habit you have had since you were 4 years old? Or would you keep the brush anyway, just in case? Drop your answer in the comments. I am curious how split this one is. And if you like this kind of thing, technology explained honestly without the hype, subscribing genuinely helps this channel keep making these. Now the honest part, because this is where most videos on this subject quietly stop. None of this is a product. Not one of these 4 pieces is something you can buy for your bathroom, and there is no announced timeline for any of them. The gap between these results and a consumer object is not small, and it is worth walking through exactly what stands in the way. Start with the fuel. The nanozyme mechanism does not work on its own. It requires hydrogen peroxide, because the catalyst's job is to convert peroxide into free radicals. That means any consumer version has to deliver a controlled amount of peroxide into a mouth safely every day for decades. Free radicals are not gentle. They are used here precisely because they are destructive. Concentrations, contact time, and what happens to soft tissue like gums and cheeks over years of repeated exposure are exactly the questions regulators exist to ask, and they have not been answered at consumer scale. Then there is the microbiome. Your mouth is not supposed to be sterile. It hosts a large and mostly beneficial bacterial community, and a treatment that indiscriminately destroys bacteria could cause problems of its own. This is part of why the acid-targeting behavior of the catalyst matters so much, and part of why researchers keep emphasizing selectivity. Some published work reports no adverse effect on the oral microbiome in the models tested. Model results are not the same as long-term human evidence. Then there is the hardware problem, which is arguably the biggest one. The micro-robot work depends on external magnetic fields, and in most of these studies, on the systems that generate and precisely steer them, that is, laboratory equipment. Shrinking a controllable magnetic actuation system into something that costs less than a hairdryer and sits on a bathroom counter is not a detail to be worked out later. It is the entire engineering challenge. It is worth noting as well that a large part of this micro-robot research is aimed at medical targets, such as biofilms on titanium dental implants or on catheters inside the body, rather than at replacing daily brushing. The overlap is real, but so is the difference. Then there is validation. There is no large, long-term, independently conducted human trial comparing any of these approaches against ordinary brushing in real households over years with real diets and real inconsistency. Laboratory conditions and animal models are where good ideas begin, not where they are confirmed. And then there is the boring barrier that kills more inventions than physics ever does. A toothbrush costs almost nothing. It is manufactured by the billion. It is already in nearly every home on Earth, and it requires no electricity, no consumables, no maintenance, and no instructions. Replacing something that cheap and that entrenched is not a technical problem. It is an economic one, and history is full of superior technologies that lost that particular argument. To be very clear about it, none of this is a reason to change what you are doing tonight. Brushing, cleaning between your teeth, and seeing a dentist remain the evidence-backed approach, and nothing in these papers suggests otherwise. What these papers suggest is that the assumption underneath the toothbrush that plaque must be removed by physical force applied by a person may not be permanent. And that is the part I find genuinely interesting, because it is a pattern. Notice what actually happened in this story. Nobody set out to kill the toothbrush. A group of researchers in Beijing were studying magnetic nanoparticles for use in an immunoassay and noticed a catalytic property that was not supposed to be there. That observation became a field. Nearly 2 decades later, that field has produced strips for detecting infectious disease, treatments being explored for wounds and infections, and a possible way to make dental plaque dissolve itself. The toothbrush was never the target. It just turned out to be downstream of a discovery about rust. And the same underlying shift is showing up in more than one place at once. Look across these 4 research threads, and they share a single idea, even though the teams and the institutions are separate. The old approach to a stuck-on layer of anything, in a kitchen, in a pipe, on a tooth, has always been force. Apply more heat, more pressure, more abrasion, more scrubbing, and hope you covered everything. The new approach is to stop applying force from outside and instead put something inside the problem that takes it apart where it sits. Precision instead of brute force. It is the same reasoning whether the target is grease, mineral scale, or a colony of bacteria that built itself a fortress on your molar. That is how most real change in everyday technology happens, not with a stage and a countdown, but with a strange result in a paper almost nobody reads, followed by 15 or 20 quiet years of engineering. The refrigerator, the microwave, the dishwasher, the light bulb, the toothbrush, all of them are objects we stopped questioning so long ago that we no longer register them as technology at all. They have become furniture, and furniture is exactly what gets reinvented when nobody is looking. There is one more thing about this particular story that is hard to ignore. The bristle toothbrush was a Chinese invention in 1498 in the Ming Dynasty. 528 years later, some of the most serious research into making that same object unnecessary is coming out of laboratories in Beijing, Hangzhou, Nanjing, and Hong Kong. Whether any of it reaches your bathroom is genuinely unresolved. Most laboratory results do not. But the physics is real, the papers are public, and the question the researchers are asking is a fair one. So here is what I will leave you with. You have used that brush every day of your life without ever once wondering whether scrubbing is actually the right way to solve the problem. How many other objects in your home are like that, unquestioned not because they work well, but because they were there before you arrived and nobody thought to ask? Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you want to keep finding the science hiding inside ordinary objects, subscribe, because that is exactly what we do here every week.